Hello, my friends. I am Damien Tao. The clock strikes midnight once more. Welcome back to the darkness. Tonight's story, it unsettles even me. Turn off your lights, put on your headphones, let the shadows gather close. This is the hour when netherwave radio bleeds through the static, when the barrier between worlds grows thin. Our tale begins in the outskirts of a city in rural China, where progress devours the past without mercy. A construction site, the year-end deadline approaching. Migrant workers desperate for their wages. They worked day and night. The excavator's engine roared without rest, tearing into earth that had not been disturbed for decades. None of them knew what slept beneath. None of them suspected the secret buried in that frozen ground. A secret that demanded payment in blood. That winter, a man we'll call Old Pan sat in his excavator cabin, operating the controls with practiced precision. One scoop after another, digging the foundation, routine work. Honest labor. Then came the sound, a heavy resonant thud that traveled through metal and bone. The entire machine shuddered. Old Pan felt it in his teeth. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was worse than the noise. Years of experience whispered warnings as he climbed down. Hard hat secured, boots sinking into winter mud. He crouched by the fresh crater, fingers digging through cold earth. What emerged made his breath catch. Black wood, ancient and polished, carved with patterns that seemed to writhe in the failing light. "Little Hao," he shouted to his co-worker, his voice cracked. "Get over here." The dread was already settling into his bones. In rural China, when you strike something unexpected in the earth, it is rarely good fortune. Little Hao came running, a young man, strong and quick. He slid down beside Old Pan, and together they dug with their hands. The more they uncovered, the worse it became. This was no stone. This was no pipe or foundation block. This was a coffin, lacquered black, ancient as nightmares. Buried for decades, perhaps longer. "Boss." Little Hao's voice trembled. "What do we do?" The other workers gathered, forming a nervous circle around the pit. Their voices rose in anxious chatter. Old Pan clenched his jaw. "Don't panic. Might be just one. Keep digging. Let's see what we're dealing with." But with each shovelful of earth removed, the color drained from every face. Because there wasn't just one coffin. 2, 3, 4. When the 8th coffin emerged from the frozen earth, no one could speak. 8 coffins, arranged with geometric precision in the center of the construction site, like some ceremony, like some curse. Now, my Western friends, you must understand in Chinese folk belief, burial arrangements carry immense significance. 8 is considered an auspicious number. Yes, but 8 coffins arranged ritually. This suggests something deliberate. Something forbidden. Old Pan's phone rang. The ringtone sounded obscene in that silence. "Boss Lee, the site owner." "Boss Lee," Old Pan's voice shook. We have a problem." 30 minutes later, a Mercedes sedan roared onto the construction site. Boss Lee stepped out of his car, and his face went white as funeral cloth. "Damn it," he whispered. "How can this be?" He circled the 8 coffins 3 times. In Chinese tradition, circling 3 times can be a ritual of acknowledgement or a sign of trapped fate. Sweat rolled down his forehead despite the winter cold. Then he stopped abruptly, his expression hardening into something dangerous. "Burn them tonight. All of them." Boss Old Pan tried to protest. "That is not, we shouldn't." "Shouldn't what?" Boss Lee's voice was ice. "If word of this gets out, we're all finished. You want your year-end wages." The word money hung in the air like a noose. Every worker's head dropped. For their meager wages, for that blood money, they would do anything. Night fell like a funeral shroud. Torches were lit across the construction site, their flames casting writhing shadows on the 8 black coffins. The atmosphere grew suffocating, wrong, as if the air itself knew what was about to happen. Old Pan, Little Hao, and 6 other workers, 8 men in total, stood under Boss Li's watchful eye. 8 workers for 8 coffins. The symmetry was not lost on anyone. They began pouring gasoline over the ancient wood. The smell was acrid, burning their nostrils. The gasoline mixed with the smell of frozen earth and something else, something putrid that had been sealed away for decades. The smell of decay, of flesh that had withered but not properly rotted. Light them, Boss Li commanded. The flames erupted instantly, climbing into the night sky like hungry spirits. All 8 coffins burning at once. The fire painted the winter sky red, a color that in Chinese culture signifies both celebration and vengeance. The flames reflected in 8 pairs of pale faces. 8 men watching 8 pyres. Then Little Hao screamed, pointing at the flames. "Look, what is that?" Through the dancing flames, shapes became visible. The coffin lids had burned away. 8 bodies, 8 withered corpses. The skin was desiccated like ancient parchment, pulled tight over bones. But the features were still recognizable, still human. And the eyes. God help them. The eyes. All 8 corpses stared up through the flames with eyes stretched impossibly wide. The Chinese say when the eyes remain open after death, it means the spirit cannot rest, cannot accept what happened. My God. Little Hao's legs gave out. He collapsed to the muddy ground. Old Pan fought to maintain composure. "Don't look, just finish burning them and let's go." The fire intensified. The corpses seemed to writhe in the flames as if still struggling against their fate. Bones cracked with sounds like gunshots. The workers flinched with each report. They stood there for over an hour, watching the coffins reduce to ash. None dared leave before the job was complete. Finally, only embers remained, glowing like malevolent eyes in the darkness. The walk back to their dormitory was silent, only footsteps echoing in the winter night. The worker dormitory was a Soviet-style 2 building. A long corridor with rooms on either side, typical of 1980s Chinese construction. Soundproofing was non-existent. Every cough, every whisper traveled through thin walls. Old Pan and his crew, the 8 who burned the coffins, occupied room 201 on the left side. Next door in room 202 lived another 8 workers. The symmetry should have warned them. Inside 201, the men collapsed onto their bunks, exhausted. But sleep wouldn't come. Those 8 pairs of eyes burned in their minds, staring accusing. Do you think we'll be punished for this?" Little Hao whispered. "Shut up with that talk," Old Pan snapped, but his own heart was hammering against his ribs. Those corpses with their death eyes wide open, that was deeply wrong. In Chinese belief, the dead should close their eyes in peace. When they remain open, it signals unfinished business, a debt unpaid. Gradually, the room fell silent. Exhaustion overcame terror. One by one, they drifted into uneasy sleep. At 2 in the morning, sounds came from next door. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Then the creak of a door opening. Old Pan's eyes snapped open. He lay frozen, listening. More footsteps in the corridor. Not one person, Maney, walking in perfect unison. "Samana's going out," Little Hao whispered. Sitting up, he crept to their door and peered through the crack. Through the corridor's sickly yellow light, he saw them. 8 figures walking in single file toward the stairwell. The workers from room 202. But something was wrong with how they moved. Where are they going this late? Old Pan joined him at the door. "Let's follow them." All 8 men from 201 slipped out silently, keeping their distance. The 8 from 202 walked slowly but with eerie coordination, like soldiers, like puppets on synchronized strings. They moved through the dormitory yard and out the main gate without hesitation. Into the night, toward the construction site. Old Pan felt ice water in his veins. They're going back to where we burned. The 8 from 202 walked straight to the burn site. The ashes were still warm, glowing faintly in the darkness. Then they did something that made Old Pan's blood freeze. They lay down. Each man positioned himself on top of where a coffin had burned. 8 living men on 8 funeral pyres. Arms crossed over their chests like corpses. What the hell? Little Hao's voice died in his throat. The 8 men lying in the ashes didn't move, didn't breathe visibly, just stared up at the night sky with empty eyes. We need to get them up, Old Pan finally whispered. This is wrong. He approached the nearest man, someone named Old Zhang, and shook his shoulder. Old Zhang's head turned slowly, too slowly like a rusted hinge. His eyes were completely white, rolled back in his skull. Old Pan scrambled backwards so fast he fell. They're possessed. They're all possessed. In Chinese folk horror, possession often follows desecration of the dead. The spirits whose remains were burned without proper ritual now sought new vessels. 8 spirits, 8 bodies. The 8 possessed men sat up in unison, mechanical, inhuman. Then they stood and turned toward Old Pan's group. Run. Old Pan didn't need to say it twice. They fled back to the dormitory, hearts hammering, not daring to look back. Behind them, they could hear it. 8 pairs of footsteps. Following at the same measured pace, they burst into room 201 and slammed the door. Someone dragged a metal bed frame against it. What do we do? What the hell do we do? Little Hao was hyperventilating. The footsteps reached their door, then stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that screams. Then came the knocking, not on their door, on the door to room 202. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. In Chinese tradition, knocking 3 times can signal a summons from the dead. The door to 202 opened. The possessed workers entered their own room. Through the thin walls, they could hear everything. 8 beds creaking as bodies lay down. Then nothing. Complete silence from next door. No snoring. No shifting. Not even the sound of breathing. Are they dead? Someone whispered. Worse. Old Pan said, they're not alive. Not anymore. Morning came reluctantly. Gray winter light seeped through dirty windows. None of them had slept. They sat in their room, afraid to leave, afraid to stay. We have to go to work, someone finally said. If we don't show up, Boss Lee will. Old Pan nodded slowly. The living still had obligations. Bills to pay, wages to earn. They opened their door cautiously. The corridor was empty in the morning light. The door to 202 stood closed. Not a sound from within. They walked past it quickly, not looking, not breathing. At the construction site, work continued. The excavator growled. Concrete mixers churned. The ash pile from last night had been bulldozed over, as if nothing had happened. Around noon, Old Pan noticed something. The workers from 202 had arrived. All 8 of them, working their stations like normal. But they didn't speak. Didn't eat lunch, didn't drink water. They just worked. Hour after hour, without pause, without fatigue. Something's wrong with Old Zhang and his crew, another worker muttered to Old Pan. Old Pan said nothing. What could he say? That they burned 8 corpses and now 8 men were possessed. As the sun set, Boss Lee's Mercedes pulled up. He stepped out, surveyed the progress, nodded with satisfaction. Good work. Keep this pace and we'll finish early. Bonuses for everyone. He didn't notice, or didn't want to notice. That night, Old Pan and his crew barricaded themselves in room 201 again. At exactly 2 a.m., they heard it. The door to 202 opening. 8 pairs of footsteps walking down the corridor, down the stairs out into the night, back to the construction site. Back to the ashes. This became the pattern. Every night, without fail. During the day, the 8 possessed workers labored without rest. At night, they returned to their coffin sites, like corpses returning to graves. Little Hao couldn't take it anymore. We have to tell someone, the police, a priest, anyone. And say what? Old Pan's voice was hollow, that we burned bodies illegally, and now they're possessing our co-workers. They were trapped, complicit, the living imprisoned by the dead they'd wronged. Days turned to weeks. The 8 from 202 never spoke, never ate, never showed any sign of humanity. Their skin grew pale, waxy, like the corpses they'd burned, but they worked. God, how they worked tirelessly. The construction progressed at an impossible rate. Bossily was ecstatic. He gave bonuses, threw a banquet, praised the dedicated workers of 202. Old Pan watched as his boss shook hands with the dead, watched him smile at corpses. Now, my friends, here the story takes a turn into even darker territory. Because 3 weeks after the burning, the construction reached a milestone. The foundation was complete. The building would rise on the exact spot where 8 souls had been desecrated. That night, something changed. At 2 a.m., the door to room 202 opened as always. But this time, the footsteps didn't go toward the stairs. They came to room 201. Old Pan heard them gathering outside. 8 bodies breathing in perfect unison, or not breathing at all. He couldn't tell which was worse. Then came the knocking, 3 times. Slow, deliberate. A summons from the other side. Don't answer it, Old Pan whispered, but his voice had no strength. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. Little Hao was crying silently. Others were praying to gods they'd long forgotten. The 3rd round of knocking shook the entire door frame. Wood splintered. Then silence. Terrible, suffocating silence. Through the crack under the door, Old Pan could see shadows. 8 pairs of feet standing motionless in the corridor. Waiting. They were waiting for something. Hours passed. The feet didn't move. Dawn came pale and gray through the windows. When the morning work bell rang at 6 a.m., the shadows finally retreated. 8 pairs of feet walking away in formation. We can't stay here, someone said. We have to leave tonight. Old Pan nodded. They would forfeit their wages. But what good was money to a dead man? That day at work, they packed their few belongings in secret. They would leave after dark before 2 a.m. But fate, it seems, had other plans. At 3 p.m., there was an accident. The excavator's arm swung wide. A cable snapped. The cable whipped across the site like a serpent. It struck one of the possessed workers, the one called Old Zhang. He fell. His skull cracked against concrete. Blood pooled beneath his head. Workers rushed over. Old Pan knelt beside the body, checking for a pulse. Dead. The body was dead, but here is what made Old Pan's blood freeze. The body was already cold, stiff. This man hadn't just died. He'd been dead for weeks. The other 7 from room 202 stood in a circle around the corpse, watching, their white eyes unblinking. Bosley arrived, face purple with rage. Get this cleaned up now. Call it a work accident. His family gets compensation, and we move on. But as they loaded the body into a truck, Old Pan noticed something in the dead man's hand. A piece of burned wood from the coffins. The man had been clutching it since that first night. That night, Old Pan and his crew fled. They didn't wait until dark. They ran in broad daylight, leaving everything behind as they reached the main road. Little Hao looked back one last time. 7 figures stood at the edge of the construction site, the remaining possessed workers, watching them leave, not moving, not following, just waiting. Old Pan later learned that the construction finished on schedule. Boss Lee made a fortune. The remaining 7 workers from room 202. They were never seen again after the building's completion. Some say they're still there, sealed inside the foundation. 7 spirits joining the 8 that were burned, a building that rose on that cursed ground. It is a luxury apartment complex now, 15 floors, hundreds of residents, but certain apartments, exactly 8 of them, remain perpetually vacant. No tenant stays more than 3 nights. They complain of footsteps at 2 a.m., of knocking on their doors, of 8 figures standing in their rooms watching them sleep. But there is more to this darkness, my friends. For the story of the 8 coffins connects to something even older, something buried deeper in the forbidden past of rural China. You see, when Boss Lee first bought that land, he received a warning from the village elders. "Don't dig there," they said. "That ground has drunk blood." But Boss Lee laughed at superstition. He was a modern man, a man who believed in concrete and steel, not ghosts and curses. What he didn't know, what he refused to learn, was the history of that plot of land. 40 years earlier, during the chaos of the Cultural Revolution, something terrible had happened there. A struggle session, they called it. Public humiliation and torture of those deemed enemies of the people. 8 people were denounced that day. 8 scholars, teachers, and artists accused of counter-revolutionary thinking. They were beaten, humiliated, and when the mob's fury reached its peak, they were buried alive on that very spot. Their families, too terrified to claim the bodies, secretly retrieved them weeks later. They buried them properly in coffins, 8 black coffins arranged in a protective formation. The formation was meant to contain the rage, to keep the vengeful spirits bound to each other, unable to harm the living. For 40 years, it worked. The spirits slept in their geometric prison until Old Pan's excavator broke the seal, until Boss Lee ordered the coffins burned. 8 spirits imprisoned for 4 decades were suddenly free, and they were hungry for justice. Now comes the part of the story that Old Pan only learned much later, from a source most unexpected. 3 months after he fled the construction site, Old Pan received a letter. No return address, just his name written in shaking characters. Inside was a single page, written by someone from room 202. One of the possessed workers. The letter read, "Brother Pan, if you're reading this, it means I managed to mail it before they took full control. My name is Wang Cheng. I'm writing this in stolen moments, when the thing inside me sleeps. It happened the first night when we went to the ashes. We didn't know what we were doing. Something called us. We couldn't resist. When we lay down in the ashes, they entered us. All 8 at once. I felt it slide into my mouth, cold and ancient and so angry. Now I'm a passenger in my own body. I watch as it works without rest. I feel no hunger, no thirst, no fatigue, only rage. Their rage. The spirit inside me was a teacher. Professor Chen, he called himself in the moments when I can hear his thoughts. He was buried alive for teaching Western literature. His students threw the dirt on his face while reciting revolutionary slogans. He died with his eyes open, watching the sky disappear above him. 40 years he waited in darkness. Now he is building the prison that will seal him forever. The building isn't just a building, Brother Pan. It is a monument. A gravestone for the 8 of us who burned them, and the 8 of us they possessed. When the construction finishes, we'll be sealed inside the foundation. Forever. We deserve it for what we did. Don't try to save us. Don't come back. Just remember us. Remember that we were human once, before we became instruments of vengeance. And Brother Pan warned others. That land has drunk blood twice now. 16 souls are trapped in that concrete. The building will never be clean. The letter ended there. No signature. Just a smudge that might have been tears or might have been blood. Old Pan never returned to that city. Never tried to contact Boss Lee or any of the other workers who'd fled. But sometimes, on winter nights when the wind howls, he thinks he can hear them. 8 voices calling from concrete and rebar. Little Hal wasn't so lucky. 6 months after they fled, he returned to the city. He'd left a photograph there, the only picture of his deceased mother. Old Pan tried to stop him. "It is not worth it," he pleaded. "It is just a picture." But Little Hal went anyway. He took a bus to the city, found the completed building, stood outside its gates. The security guard told Old Pan what happened next. Little Hal stood there for 3 hours, staring up at the building. Then he walked inside, took the elevator to the 8th floor, apartment 808. The number 8 repeated. Most auspicious and most cursed. In Chinese numerology, 8 sounds like prosper, but doubled. It can also mean perpetual prosperity or perpetual suffering. The number doesn't discriminate. The apartment was vacant. Had been vacant since the building opened, but the door was unlocked. Little Hal went inside. The security footage shows him entering at 2:13 p.m. He never came out. When Old Pan heard the news, he took the bus to the city immediately, demanded to see the apartment. The police had already searched it. Empty, completely empty. Not even dust on the floors, as if the apartment had been sealed since construction. But Old Pan noticed something the police had missed. In the corner of the master bedroom, barely visible against the white wall, 8 small handprints, child-sized, pressed into the wall as if the concrete had been soft. But there was a 9th print in the center, fresh adult-sized Little Hal's hand. Old Pan pressed his own hand against it. The concrete was warm, pulsing like a heartbeat. He jerked away, and as he did, he heard it, muffled, coming from inside the wall. Voices, many voices speaking in unison. 8 becomes 9. 9 becomes complete. The circle demands balance. Old Pan ran. He ran from that apartment, from that building, from that cursed city. Little Hal's body was never found. He was declared missing. His mother's photograph, it turned up 3 weeks later, slipped under Old Pan's door. On the back, written in Little Hal's handwriting, "I understand now. The 8 needed a 9th to close the circle. Thank you for trying to warn me." Old Pan keeps that photograph, a reminder, a warning, a memorial. The building still stands. Apartments 801 through 809 remain vacant. No amount of rent reduction can convince anyone to stay. Tenants on the floors below complain of sounds at 2 a.m., footsteps above them. Always 9 sets of footsteps walking in formation, and sometimes, in apartment 808, lights turn on by themselves. Security footage shows nothing entering or leaving, but shadows move behind the windows. 9 shadows sitting in a circle, waiting. Old Pan never worked construction again. He tends a small vegetable garden now, far from cities, far from concrete and steel. But every year on the anniversary of the burning, he receives a package. No return address. Inside is always the same thing. A piece of burned wood from the coffins and a photograph of the apartment building. Each year, there is 1 more window lit on the 8th floor. First it was 1, then 2, then 3. This year, the photograph showed 7 windows lit. Old Pan knows what that means. When the 8th window lights, the circle will be complete. 8 original spirits, 8 possessed workers, waiting for the 8th of the original 8 burners to join them. Old Pan is the last one left alive from that night. The other 6 who fled, all dead now, accidents. They called them a fall from scaffolding, a car crash, a sudden illness. But Old Pan knows the truth. One by one, they've been collected. One by one, the windows have lit. He is 63 now, too old to run, too tired to hide, and perhaps after carrying this guilt for so long, too ready to finally rest. Last week, he received a phone call. No voice on the other end. just breathing. 9 people breathing in perfect synchronization. Then a single word, spoken by 9 voices at once. Soon, Old Pan hung up, made himself tea, sat in his garden and waited. That night, at exactly 2 a.m., he heard footsteps outside his door. 9 sets of footsteps, walking in perfect formation. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, final. Old Pan stood, straightened his shirt, took one last look at his garden in the moonlight. Then he opened the door. The next morning, his neighbors found the house empty. No sign of struggle, no blood. No body, just a photograph on the table. The apartment building. All 8 windows on the 8th floor now blazing with light. The building management tried everything. Priests, monks, feng shui masters. Nothing worked. Finally, they sealed the 8th floor entirely, welded the stairwell doors shut, cut power to that level, pretended it didn't exist. But on certain nights, quiet winter nights when the wind howls, residents swear they can still hear it. Footsteps above them. 9 sets of feet, walking in formation, round and round and round. Forever. And sometimes, very rarely, someone will see faces in those windows. 9 faces pressed against the glass. 8 arranged in a circle, and 1 in the center, all with their eyes wide open, staring down at the ground where they were burned. The story closes its circle, but circles, my friends, have a way of opening again. I tell you this tale tonight not merely to frighten you, but to teach you something about the East that the West often forgets. In Chinese philosophy, death is not an ending, it is a transformation, and the dead, when wronged, do not simply vanish into the void. They wait. They remember, and when the conditions align, when the living repeat the patterns of the past, they return to restore the balance. The 8 coffins were not random. They were a binding spell, constructed by desperate families to contain their loved ones' rage. For 40 years it held. But Boss Lee's greed broke what grief had carefully built, and once broken, the debt had to be paid. 8 for 8, 9 to complete the cycle. Now I must tell you the final piece of this puzzle, the piece that makes the horror complete. That building, the luxury apartment complex built on blood and bones, it was never meant to be residential. Bosseli's original plan before the coffins were found was to build a memorial hall, a museum of the Cultural Revolution. The irony is almost beautiful in its cruelty. The 8 who died demanding to be remembered were burned to hide the evidence of their existence. So they built their own memorial, in concrete and terror, in possession and revenge. A monument that no one can ignore. Every tenant who moves into that building, knowingly or not, becomes a witness to what happened. The footsteps ensure no one forgets. And Boss Lee, you're wondering about him, aren't you? He made his fortune from that building, became wealthy beyond measure, built an empire of concrete towers across the province. But he never lived to enjoy it. 3 years after the building's completion, he was found in his Mercedes. The car was parked in his personal garage. Doors locked from the inside, engine off, no signs of violence. But his face witnesses said his face was frozen in absolute terror, eyes wide open staring at something in the empty passenger seat. In his lap was a piece of burned wood, and on the windshield, written in condensation from the inside, 10. You see, the circle demanded 10, not 9, 8 murdered scholars. 8 workers who burned them, 1 foreman who led the burning, and 1 master who ordered it. Now the building houses 10 restless spirits on its 8th floor. A perfect, complete circle of vengeance. The city government has tried to demolish the building twice. Both times the demolition crews refused to continue after the first day. They reported seeing faces in the windows. 9 faces watching them, and 1 face, Boss Lee's face, screaming silently from behind the glass. So the building stands, A testament to what happens when you disturb the dead without respect, when you prioritize profit over the sacred duty of burial. In Chinese tradition, we burn paper money for the dead spirit currency to use in the afterlife. We burn paper houses, paper cars, paper servants. But what happens when you burn the dead themselves without offering them anything? When you reduce their final resting place to ash and rubble, they take what they need from the living. They build their own afterlife from flesh and fear. This is the lesson of the 8 coffins, my friends. Respect for the dead is not superstition. It is protection. The boundary between life and death is thinner than you think, especially in places where violence has soaked the earth. Now, as I close this tale, I must tell you one final thing, something that will make you understand why I share these stories with you. That building, it still accepts new tenants. The lower floors are occupied. Life goes on above the sealed 8th floor. And every year, on the anniversary of the burning, the building management receives applications. Always exactly 10 applications. Always for apartments on the 8th floor. The names are different each year. The handwriting varies. But certain details are always the same. The time they wish to move in, 2 a.m. The preferred lease length, forever. And the emergency contact is always left blank. The building burns these applications every year. A small ritual of cleansing. But they keep coming, because the circle is never truly complete. There are always more debts to pay, always more balance to restore. And so I ask you, my friends in the West, when you see construction sites in your cities, when you watch old buildings torn down and new ones rise, do you ever wonder what lies beneath? What history is being paved over? What dead are being disturbed? Progress has a cost, and sometimes that cost is paid not in money, but in souls. The night falls silent once more. My friends, the candle beside me gutters and dies. But before I release you back to your world, let me leave you with this thought. Tonight, when you lie in your bed, listen to the sounds above you, the footsteps in apartments overhead. Are they your neighbors, or are they something else? Something that has been there longer than you. Something that was never properly put to rest. The dead walk among us more often than we know, especially in places built on their graves. Sweet dreams, my friends. And remember, when you hear that knocking at 2 a.m., that slow, deliberate knock 3 times, perhaps it is best not to answer. This has been Damien Tao, your guide through the shadows between East and West. Until the next time darkness calls, sleep carefully, my friends. Sleep very carefully indeed. The story of the 8 coffins is complete. But remember, in the world of Chinese folk horror, completion is merely another form of beginning. The night falls silent once more, but you know where to find me when the darkness calls again. Subscribe, my friends, so Netherwave Radio may reach you the next time the moon bleeds red. Until then, sleep carefully.